My name is Lila Morgan. I'm 27, and for the last 5 years I'd called Austin, Texas home, or at least the closest thing to it I could manage. I'd come here from the sleepy corners of New England, chasing a dream of music that lately felt more like a stubborn ghost. The unfinished piano piece I was wrestling with in my cramped South Congress apartment, much like my life then, was stuck on a somber note with no way out. Each chord progression felt like another dead end, mirroring the stack of rejections from local venues and the dwindling numbers in my bank account. Then the phone rang, its shrill, insistent sound tearing through the gray Austin afternoon, a harbinger of a different kind of silence. The voice on the other end was clipped official, and it delivered the news that my Aunt Clementine, my mother's vibrant, music-loving older sister, had passed away peacefully in her sleep in Maple Creek. Maple Creek. The name itself was a melody from a gentler time, a place of golden autumns and the comforting scent of wood smoke so far removed from the humid concrete pulse of Austin. It was where Aunt Clem had her little music shop, Clementine's Harmonies, a place that had been more of a home to me during my childhood summers than anywhere else. Within hours, I was on a plane, the unfinished tune and the unfinished life I was living in Austin, momentarily forgotten, replaced by a hollow ache. Maple Creek, when I arrived, was just as I remembered, a postcard of New England charm nestled in a valley aflame with late October colors. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and distant fireplaces. Aunt Clementine's small clapboard house, a welcoming butter yellow, stood on a quiet street lined with sugar maples. The funeral was a somber affair, yet underscored by a warmth that spoke volumes of Aunt Clementine's place in this tight-knit community. The small-town church was full an eclectic mix of artists, elderly townsfolk, young families, and even a few of the local teenagers who I vaguely remembered Aunt Clem used to give impromptu guitar lessons to. I saw my older brother Ethan and his wife Veronica in the front pew. Ethan, ever the pragmatic New Yorker, looked impeccable in his dark suit, his expression carefully composed. Veronica beside him was a study in sleek urban sophistication, her gaze sweeping over the rustic church with an air I couldn't quite decipher. Our reunion was brief, a stiff hug from Ethan, a cooler nod from Veronica. The distance between us felt wider than the miles that usually separated New York from my Texan existence. After the service, drawn by an undeniable pull, I found myself standing before Clementine's Harmonies. The faded gold lettering on the window, the slightly crooked sign the window display news, featuring a vintage ukulele and a stack of sheet music. It was all exactly as I remembered. Stepping inside, the familiar scent of old wood rosin and something uniquely Clementine enveloped me. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunbeams slanting through the window. Guitars marahal on the walls like silent sentinels, a piano graced a corner, and shelves overflowed with music books and quirky instruments. Every object hummed with memories, Aunt Clem teaching me my first chords on a battered acoustic guitar, her laughter echoing as I fumbled her patient hands guiding mine on the piano keys. This shop wasn't just a building, it was the repository of her soul and a significant piece of mine. Later that evening, back at Aunt Clementine's house, the three of us gathered in the cozy living room, the scent of her lavender potpourri still lingering in the air. The warmth of the community, however, quickly dissipated. Ethan, after a perfunctory clearing of his throat, got straight to the point. "Lila," he began his tone all business. "Veronica and I have been looking into Aunt Clem's affairs, the shop Clementine's Harmonies. Well, it's not really viable." I stiffened. "What do you mean, not viable?" Veronica chimed in, her voice smooth as polished steel. "It's a lovely, quaint little place, dear, but sentiment doesn't pay the bills. It's been losing money for years. We've had an offer, actually. A very good one from a retail chain looking to expand into these smaller towns. They want the location." The words hit me like a physical blow. Sell it, but Aunt Clem loved that shop. She always said she wanted it to stay for the town for me if I ever wanted it. My voice was barely a whisper. Ethan waved a dismissive hand. "Aunt Clem was a romantic, Lila, not a businesswoman. We have to be realistic. You're struggling in Austin. You're certainly in no position to take over a failing business in a small New England town." He pulled a sheaf of papers from his briefcase. As her closest surviving relatives with sound financial standing, and with the way her will is structured, the responsibility and the decision falls to us. It's for the best. This will simplify things, give us all a clean break, and honestly, a bit of a financial cushion. I stared at the documents he casually placed on the coffee table, my mind reeling. It felt like they were talking about an old piece of furniture, not Aunt Clementine's life's work, not the heart of her community. "I don't need to be protected," I managed, my voice trembling. "Aunt Clem wanted me to have this place. It's in the will. I have the right." I wasn't even sure if that last part was true, but a desperate defiance was rising within me. Ethan's expression hardened. "Lila, don't be difficult. The offer is on the table and it's a good one. It's above market value. We're talking about a significant sum." He named a figure that made my head spin, not because it was enticing, but because it felt like blood money. "This isn't a debate. The decision has been made." His voice was cold, final. "Emotions don't solve business problems." Veronica stood adjusting the collar of her silk blouse as if everything was already settled. "We'll be meeting with the buyer's representatives tomorrow to finalize the preliminary agreement. It'll all be over quickly." I looked from Ethan's implacable face to Veronica's cool, appraising gaze. They were strangers to me, these people who shared my blood. The warmth of Maple Creek, the love I'd felt at the funeral, the comforting presence of Aunt Clementine's legacy, it all turned to ash in my mouth. They left shortly after Ethan pausing at the door to say, with a sliver of what might have been annoyance or perhaps a distorted sense of familial duty, "You should come back to Austin, Lila. There's nothing for you here." The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence of my aunt's house. I sank into her favorite floral armchair, the one where she used to sit and hum new melodies. Every door seemed to have slammed shut in my face. Maple Creek, once my childhood paradise, now tasted only of betrayal's bitterness. Would Aunt Clementine's legacy and a part of my soul simply vanish like an unfinished song? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered, as the shadows lengthened in the quiet room. The question of Aunt Clementine's vanishing legacy, heavy and unanswered, had haunted my sleepless nights in her quiet house. Days blurred into a gray fog of grief and a gnawing helplessness. Ethan and Veronica had returned to New York, leaving me with the implicit instruction to pack up my aunt's personal effects and essentially erase her presence before the shop was sold from under me. My fingers, moving with a numb sort of anomie, skimmed over each of her belongings in the little back room of Clementine's Harmonies. A silk scarf, still holding a faint trace of her lavender scent. A chipped teacup, a collection of well-loved poetry books. Each touch was like a gentle stab. I just wanted to pack away this past, this fresh layer of pain, and run back to the anonymity of Austin, however unfulfilling it had become. I was sorting through a teetering pile of sheet music and old concert programs when it happened. My elbow caught the stack, sending papers cascading to the wooden floor. With a sigh, I knelt to gather them, and then I saw it. A small, leather-bound journal, its dark green cover softened and worn at the edges, that had been tucked unseen within the pile. It wasn't a music ledger. It was something more personal. Aunt Clementine's handwriting, a familiar, elegant script, adorned a small, embossed label, "CM and My Thoughts and Notions." It felt like a whisper from the other side, a tangible piece of her I hadn't expected to find. Back in Aunt Clem's butter-yellow house with the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the braided rug in her living room, I hesitated before opening it. It felt almost like an intrusion. But the alternative, the sterile finality Ethan and Veronica were imposing, spurred me on. With a deep breath, I opened the journal. The pages were filled with her distinctive cursive detailing, not daily events, but observations, snippets of melody ideas, pressed flowers and thoughts about the Maple Creek community she so clearly adored. There were entries about the changing seasons, the way the light fell on the maple trees outside her shop window, the satisfaction of seeing a child's face light up when they mastered a new chord. And then I found entries that made my heart ache, vague, worries about the future of Clementine's Harmonies, her desire for it to remain a haven for music lovers, a place of community. "This little shop," she'd written, "is more than just wood and strings. It's a song the town sings together." Tucked between 2 pages towards the end, I found a small, intricately made brass key, its patina, a dull gold attached to a faded silk ribbon. Beside it, a cryptic little note in her hand, "For when the music seems to fade, look where the oldest stories are made. The heart remembers what the mind forgets." Below it, a tiny, almost childlike sketch of a section of shelving in the shop, one particular decorative wooden knot circled. A shiver ran down my spine. This was more than just a diary. This felt like a clue. Could Aunt Clem have anticipated something? Could she have left something for me? The thought was a fragile spark in the overwhelming darkness. The next morning, armed with the journal and the little brass key, a sliver of purpose I hadn't felt in days propelled me back to Clementine's Harmonies. The shop was silent, a tomb of melodies waiting to be reawakened. I found the shelving unit from her sketch, an old dark oak piece that held mostly biographies of classical composers. Running my fingers over the wood, I located the distinctive knot. Pressing it gently, I heard a faint click. A small, almost invisible panel, no bigger than a book, sprang open. My heart hammered. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a slim wooden box. The brass key slid into its lock with a satisfying turn. The contents weren't a hoard of gold, but to me they felt infinitely more precious. There were a few old letters detailing the shop's early struggles and triumphs, a photograph of a much younger Aunt Clementine, with a group of smiling musicians I didn't recognize, and beneath them a thick vellum envelope sealed not with wax, but with a simple string tie. Inside, several neatly folded documents. One appeared to be an older version of her will, much like Ethan had probably seen. But another, dated only 6 months prior, was clearly a codicil and addendum, and its language, even to my untrained eye, seemed to emphasize her desire for the shop to be used for community enrichment through music, and explicitly mentioned me, Lila Morgan, as a preferred steward should I be willing and able. It also mentioned a Maple Creek Heritage Trust I'd never heard of. Was this legally binding? Could it override whatever papers Ethan had? I had no idea. The despair hadn't vanished, but now it had a tiny, fierce opponent, a question mark, a possibility. Clutching the papers, I knew I needed help. Someone who understood Maple Creek, someone who knew Aunt Clementine. My first thought was Mr. Arthur Eddington, her lifelong friend and the town's retired music teacher. I remembered Aunt Clem speaking of him with great affection. I found him, as I half expected, in the quiet, sun-dappled reading room of the Maple Creek Public Library, a handsome stone building on the town green. Mr. Eddington was a man whose kindness radiated from him like warmth from a stove. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his eyes behind spectacles perched on his nose were gentle and discerning. When I introduced myself and explained my predicament, showing him the journal and the codicil, he listened intently, his expression shifting from sorrow at Clementine's passing to a thoughtful concern. "Your aunt was a remarkable woman, Lila," he said, his voice soft. "She poured her heart and soul into that shop and into this town. She often spoke of you, you know. Proud of your musical talents she was." He examined the codicil. "This is interesting. Very interesting." Clem could be quite determined when she set her mind to something. He didn't offer false promises, but his thoughtful gaze was reassuring. "Perhaps," he mused, "there are avenues to explore." He suggested I also speak with Penelope Gable, or Penny, as everyone called her. "Penny's got her finger on the pulse of this town," Mr. Arthur said with a smile, "and the daily grind is right opposite Clementine's Harmonies. She sees everything." Penny's Cafe was a cheerful, bustling place filled with the aroma of coffee and freshly baked scones. She was a whirlwind of energy with bright, inquisitive eyes and a welcoming smile that reached them. When I explained haltingly at first what Ethan planned and what I'd found, Penny wiped her hands on her apron and sat down opposite me, her expression instantly serious. "Sell Clementine's," she exclaimed, her voice a shocked whisper that nevertheless carried, "to one of those soulless chains over my dead body, and I dare say half the town's." She told me stories of how Aunt Clem had helped struggling young musicians, hosted open mic nights, how the shop was a meeting place, a sanctuary. That shop is part of Maple Creek's Melody Child, she said, her hand briefly covering mine. We can't let it go silent. Later that afternoon, the three of us, myself, Mr. Arthur and Penny, sat around a table in the cozy back corner of Clementine's Harmonies, the newly discovered document spread out before us. The air, which had felt so heavy with finality just days before now, thrummed with a fragile, nascent energy. Mr. Arthur, with his quiet wisdom, and Penny, with her practical optimism, looked at me not with pity but with expectation. I said, my voice gaining a strength I hadn't known it possessed. I think Aunt Clem left us more than just memories. I think she left us a fighting chance. Penny grinned, a spark igniting in her eyes. Well then, Lila Morgan, what's our first move? Mr. Arthur nodded slowly. Indeed, it seems our dear Clementine may have composed one last rather intricate piece for us to perform. Over Penny's surprisingly strong coffee, amidst Mr. Arthur's encouraging words and the familiar scent of old wood and rosin, I no longer felt quite so alone. A new, unexpected family was forming around me, and the melody of Maple Creek, I realized with a surge of fragile hope, might not have to fall silent after all. The path ahead was daunting, Ethan's resolve and legal standing formidable, but for the first time since that fateful phone call, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. I felt the tentative first notes of a counter-melody. The tentative first notes of that counter-melody I'd felt at the end of our meeting with Mr. Arthur and Penny began to swell into something more tangible the very next morning. The air in The Daily Grind. Penny's bustling cafe was thicker than the usual aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans and cinnamon scones. Around a large oak table in the corner, usually occupied by solitary newspaper readers or gossiping friends, a small group had gathered. Besides myself, Mr. Arthur and Penny, there was Leo, a young guitarist with bright, intelligent eyes, whom Aunt Clementine had often mentored. Mrs. Henderson, the retired town librarian, who knew every historical document Maple Creek possessed, also joined us along with Mark Olson, who ran the hardware store down the street and was a respected voice in local business circles. Their eyes were fixed on me no longer with the pity I'd first encountered, but with expectation, a silent belief that perhaps together we could make a difference. Penny, ever the pragmatist, had already set up a large notepad on an easel. "All right, folks," she said, tapping a pen against it. "Lila has Aunt Clementine's later codicil and a few clues. Ethan is pushing to sell Clementine's Harmonies to Value More retailers, a soulless big-box chain if I ever heard of one. Within weeks, maybe sooner. We need a plan." Our unofficial headquarters quickly became the backroom of Clementine's Harmonies, amidst the comforting scent of old instruments and sheet music. The initial wave of fragile hope solidified into a focused determination. We knew we were up against Ethan's financial leverage and his unwavering pragmatic resolve, but looking at the earnest faces around me, I felt a strength that wasn't entirely my own. The tasks were divided naturally. Mr. Arthur with Mrs. Henderson's invaluable assistance at the town archives and library began to delve into the legalities of the codicil, the shop's official history, and any town ordinances related to heritage properties. Penny, a natural networker, started rallying support from other local business owners and longtime residents, drafting a petition to save the shop. Leo, a digital native, immediately proposed an online presence. "We need a Save Clementine's Harmonies Facebook page and Instagram, maybe even a TikTok to get the younger folks involved." He'd set his fingers already flying across his phone. My role, it seemed, was to be the central point, the keeper of Aunt Clem's initial clues, and to continue sifting through her belongings for anything else that might help. Days turned into a flurry of activity. Mr. Arthur discovered that while a codicil needed proper legal validation, Aunt Clementine had indeed years ago successfully petitioned to have Clementine's Harmonies listed as a building of local cultural significance. This designation, while not ironclad protection, came with certain stipulations regarding changes to its primary use requiring community consultation. It was a small foothold, but a vital one. Meanwhile, Leo's online campaign took off with surprising speed. He posted old photos of the shop, shared anecdotes from residents about Aunt Clementine, and even created a short moving video montage set to a piece of classical guitar music. The comments section overflowed with support and fond memories. He then organized a sidewalk serenade for Clems, an afternoon of acoustic music right in front of the shop. Several local musicians, young and old, turned up to play. Passers-by stopped, listened, and gladly signed Penny's growing petition. A reporter from the Maple Creek Chronicle, the local weekly paper, even showed up and interviewed Leo and a visibly nervous me. The article, when it came out, was small, but it was something. It felt like we were finally making some noise. The increased visibility, however, didn't go unnoticed. One evening, my phone rang. It was Ethan. His voice was tight with controlled anger. "Lila, what exactly do you think you're doing?" He demanded, no trace of fraternal warmth in his tone. "Making a public spectacle. This is a private family matter. You're complicating a very straightforward business transaction. I have a signed letter of intent from Value More, and they're offering a premium. This little charade of yours isn't going to change anything except embarrass us all." "It was Aunt Clem's wish, Ethan," I countered, my voice steadier than I felt. "And the town wants it to stay." He scoffed. "The town doesn't pay the bills, Lila. I suggest you stop this before you make things worse for yourself." The line went dead, leaving me shaken, but strangely more resolute. His anger meant we were having an effect. The pressure mounted. We learned from a sympathetic contact at the town clerk's office, a young woman who'd taken piano lessons from Aunt Clementine as a child, that Ethan's lawyer had formally submitted paperwork to expedite the transfer of ownership, citing the pending sale. Time was rapidly running out. "We need to take this to the town council," Mr. Arthur declared during one of our evening strategy sessions at the shop, the scent of Penny's coffee and Mr. Olson's contributed donuts perfuming the air. "The cultural significance designation gives us an opening. If we can present our case with the petition and the codicil, we might be able to persuade them to at least delay the sale to enforce the community consultation clause." It was our best shot. The next town council meeting was less than a week away. Just as we were finalizing our presentation strategy, a sleek, official-looking envelope arrived by courier for me. It was from Ethan's lawyers. Inside, a coldly worded letter informing me that the final sales agreement with Value More retailers was drafted and scheduled for Ethan's signature in New York in precisely 5 days. A wave of panic threatened to engulf me. 5 days. It felt like an impossible deadline. That night, and for the next few nights, Clementine's harmonies glowed with light long after the rest of Maple Creek had gone to sleep. We worked tirelessly, Mr. Arthur refining legal arguments, Penny and Mark Olson preparing summaries of community support and economic alternatives, Leo designing visuals for our presentation. I found myself tasked with drafting the main speech, the narrative that would tie everything together, that would, I hoped, convey the heart of what we were fighting for. The weight of it felt immense. One particularly late evening, as I struggled with the words, the shop door creaked open. It was Mrs. Henderson, followed by a few other familiar faces from the town, their arms laden with a thermos of hot soup sandwiches and a freshly baked apple pie. "Thought you young folks might need some fuel," Mrs. Henderson said, her smile kind. "The whole town's rooting for you, you know." That simple act of kindness, that tangible evidence of community solidarity, was more fortifying than any legal argument. It was the melody of Maple Creek rising to meet our fledgling countertune. The night before the council meeting, I stood before the dusty, ornate mirror in Aunt Clementine's old bedroom, the draft of my speech clutched in my hand. My reflection stared back, a young woman I barely recognized. The uncertain, struggling musician from Austin was still there, but overlaid now was a different image. Someone who had found a voice not just for herself, but for a community, for a legacy. The paper in my hand trembled slightly, but the voice in my head, the one that would speak tomorrow, was strangely steady. Tomorrow, not only would the fate of Clementine's harmonies be decided, but the voice of Maple Creek itself would be heard. And I would be the one to tell its story. The paper in my hand, the speech I'd rehearsed 100 times, still trembled slightly, but the voice in my head, the one that had found its footing in the reflection of Aunt Clementine's mirror, was strangely steady. As I walked with Mr. Arthur and Penny towards the Maple Creek Town Hall the next evening, I knew that tonight it wasn't just my story I was there to tell. it was Maple Creek's. The lights of the town council meeting room shone brightly on rows of expectant, tense faces. Every wooden chair in the modest hall was taken. Farmers in worn denim sat beside shopkeepers in their Sunday best. Young families with restless children perched on laps were squeezed next to elderly residents who had known Clementine's Harmonies since its inception. Leo gave me a thumbs up from the front row, where he sat with a contingent of young musicians, their expressions a mixture of hope and defiance. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable energy that was both daunting and strangely uplifting. This was no longer just my personal battle, it had become a stand for the soul of our town. At a polished table at the front sat the 5 members of the town council, their faces betraying little. Mayor Thompson, a stoic man known more for his pragmatism than his sentimentality, called the meeting to order. I spotted Ethan's lawyer, a sharp-suited man named Mr. Davies, from a Boston firm, seated confidently near the front, a thick briefcase at his feet. Ethan himself was conspicuously absent, a fact that stung but didn't entirely surprise me. The agenda item, proposed sale of property at 12 Main Street, Clementine's Harmonies, was called, and Mr. Davies was invited to speak first. He strode to the podium with an air of unshakable confidence, his presentation slick and well-rehearsed. He spoke of economic revitalization of progress, of the significant tax revenue value more retailers would bring to Maple Creek. He painted Clementine's Harmonies as a charming but ultimately unprofitable relic of the past, a burden that Mr. Ethan Morgan, as the responsible heir, was wisely choosing to alleviate. He emphasized Ethan's legal right to dispose of the property as he saw fit, presenting copies of the original will and the advanced stage of the sales agreement. His words were logical, persuasive, and utterly devoid of any understanding of what the shop truly meant. Then it was my turn. My legs felt a little unsteady as I walked to the podium, the faces in the room a blur. I took a deep breath, clutching the worn leather journal in one hand and my notes in the other. I started by speaking not of legalities or finances, but of Aunt Clementine, her laughter, her generosity, her unwavering belief in the power of music to connect and heal. I spoke of my own childhood summers spent within the shop's welcoming walls, of the first chords she taught me, of the way she made everyone, young or old, feel like they had a melody within them. Then I laid out our case. I presented the codicil explaining Aunt Clem's desire for the shop to serve the community. I held up Penny's petition, heavy with hundreds of signatures from Maple Creek residents. I spoke of the shop's official designation as a building of local cultural significance and the town's own ordinances regarding the preservation of such spaces. Leo, at a signal, dimmed the lights slightly and projected a short, heartfelt video onto a screen, a montage of old photographs of events at the shop, clips from the sidewalk serenade, and brief testimonials from residents, their voices filled with emotion as they spoke of what Clementine's Harmonies meant to them. Mrs. Henderson's tearful plea to save a piece of our heart was particularly moving. Mr. Arthur then spoke briefly but eloquently about the shop's rich history, its role as an informal community center, and the free music lessons Aunt Clementine had provided for generations of Maple Creek children who couldn't otherwise afford them. "This isn't just a building," he concluded, his voice resonant with conviction. "It's a living legacy." Mr. Davies, when invited to rebut, was dismissive. "Heartfelt, I'm sure," he said with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But sentiment regrettably does not supersede contractual law or property rights. My client, Mr. Morgan, is acting well within his rights and frankly in a financially prudent manner." He questioned the legal standing of the codicil, suggesting it was an informal note rather than a binding document. The tension in the room was electric. Several council members leaned forward, asking pointed questions of both Mr. Davies and me. Mayor Thompson, his gaze fixed on me, asked, "Ms. Morgan, if the sale is halted, what is your concrete plan for this culturally significant yet reportedly unprofitable establishment?" It was the question I had dreaded yet also prepared for. I spoke of our nascent ideas: community-led fundraising, applying for arts grants, developing a cooperative model, expanding the music lessons, and creating a vibrant schedule of local performances. I admitted it would be a challenge, but I emphasized the overwhelming community support and our collective determination. We believe, I said, my voice surprisingly firm, that Clementine's Harmonies is an investment in our community's spirit, and that's a return you can't measure in dollars and cents alone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of presentations, questions, and rebuttals, Mayor Thompson banged his gavel. "The council will now adjourn to deliberate in closed session," he announced. "We will reconvene in 30 minutes to announce our decision." The 30 minutes that followed were the longest of my life. The hall buzzed with hushed, anxious conversations. Penny squeezed my hand, her own surprisingly cold. Mr. Arthur offered a reassuring smile, though I could see the worry in his eyes. Leo paced nervously at the back. I just sat numbly replaying every word, every argument, wondering if we had done enough. Ethan's lawyer, Mr. Davies, sat apart calmly checking messages on his phone, the picture of unconcern. Then the door to the deliberation room opened. The council members filed back to their seats, their faces unreadable. Mayor Thompson stood, a single sheet of paper in his hand. A profound silence fell over the room. The council has reviewed all materials presented and has listened carefully to the arguments from both sides. He began, his voice slow and deliberate. "We acknowledge the legal rights of Mr. Ethan Morgan concerning the property at 12 Main Street. However, we also recognize the substantial evidence presented regarding the historical and ongoing cultural significance of Clementine's Harmonies to the Maple Creek community, as well as its official designation under Town Ordinance 7.4b. He paused, and I held my breath. "Therefore," he continued, "the Maple Creek Town Council has voted by a majority of 3-2 to enact a temporary moratorium of 90 days on any sale or transfer of ownership of said property. This period will allow for a thorough review of the codicil presented by Ms. Morgan, a formal assessment of the property's cultural impact, and an exploration of viable community-based solutions for its future. We strongly encourage all parties involved to enter into a constructive dialogue during this period." A collective gasp, followed by an explosion of applause and cheers, filled the room. Penny was hugging me, tears in her eyes. Mr. Arthur was beaming, shaking hands with a jubilant Leo. I felt my own tears, hot and sudden, streaming down my face, tears of shock, of relief, of overwhelming gratitude. We had done it. We had bought time. We had made them listen. Mr. Davies was already on his phone, his face a mask of controlled fury. As we spilled out of the town hall into the cool night air, the celebration continued. People I'd never met before were patting me on the back, thanking me. It was a victory, a significant one, born from the collective voice of a small town determined to protect its heart. Later that night, as the initial euphoria began to subside, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. His voice was ice. "You think you've won, Lila. You've just made a very powerful enemy in Value-More, and you've deeply embarrassed this family. This isn't over. 90 days is nothing. Enjoy your little fantasy while it lasts." He hung up before I could respond. The threat was chilling, a stark reminder that the fight was far from finished. But as I looked out Aunt Clementine's window at the moonlit silhouette of Maple Creek, I clutched the worn leather journal to my chest. Tears streamed down my face again, but this time they were tears of happiness and a profound, almost sacred gratitude. We did it. Maple Creek's voice had been heard. And though I knew the battle for Clementine's Harmonies might still have one more, perhaps even more difficult round tonight, we had earned the right to hope, and we would be ready. Ethan's chilling words, "This isn't over," had echoed in my mind for a few uneasy days following the town council's decision. But Maple Creek, it turned out, was more than ready. The 90-day moratorium, instead of being a period of anxious waiting, became a whirlwind of community action. The initial threat from Value-More retailers seemed to recede as local lawyers, inspired by our stand, volunteered their time to solidify the legal standing of Aunt Clementine's codicil and the shop's heritage designation. The overwhelming public support made any further aggressive moves by Ethan or the corporation politically unpalatable in a town like Maple Creek. 3 months later, on a bright, crisp Saturday in early September, the sound of hammers tapped a cheerful rhythm against the old clapboard siding of Clementine's Harmonies, mingling with laughter and the joyful strains of an acoustic guitar. The shop no longer wore the somber veil of the past, but radiated new life, a vibrant energy nurtured by the hands and hearts of Maple Creek. Volunteers, from teenagers eager to paint to retired carpenters offering their skills, had transformed the space. The walls were a warm, inviting yellow, the old wooden floors gleamed, and new, comfortable seating areas invited people to linger. I stood in the doorway, a smudge of paint on my cheek, and a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the late summer sun. Mr. Arthur was meticulously tuning a vintage cello in the corner. Penny was arranging a display of locally made instrument straps near the counter, and Leo was expertly stringing fairy lights around the newly built small performance platform at the back. We were preparing for the Maple Creek Harmony Revival, a day-long music festival and official reopening of Clementine's Harmonies. "Looks like a real music shop again, doesn't it, Lila?" Mr. Arthur said, a pleased smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "It looks like home, Mr. Arthur," I replied, and I meant it more than he knew. The journey hadn't been without its challenges. There were financial hurdles, endless decisions about inventory, and the constant low hum of worry about making the shop truly sustainable. But every time doubt crept in, the community was there. Bake sales were organized, a Friends of Clementine's Harmonies fund was established, and local businesses offered services and supplies at discounted rates. We weren't just a shop, we were a cause, a symbol of what Maple Creek could achieve when it came together. A week before the festival, a thin envelope arrived postmarked New York. My heart did a familiar little lurch. It was from Ethan. I opened it with trepidation. Inside, a brief typed note. No apology, not really. But he wrote that his lawyers had advised him that further legal action regarding the shop would likely be fruitless and costly, given the town council's stance and the unexpectedly fervent local sentiment. He informed me he would not contest the codicil further and wished me success in my endeavor. It was stiff, impersonal, but it was closure. I folded the letter, a quiet sense of relief washing over me. He hadn't changed, but he had conceded. That was enough. In the days leading up to the Harmony Revival, I'd found an unfinished melody in one of Aunt Clementine's old notebooks. Just a few beautiful, haunting bars with the note for Lila's song scribbled beside them. Working late into the night, surrounded by the comforting presence of her instruments, I'd poured my own experiences, my grief, my hope, and my profound gratitude for Maple Creek into completing it. It was a simple piece, a folk ballad, but it felt like the truest thing I'd ever written. The day of the festival dawned bright and clear, a perfect New England autumn day. Main Street was closed to traffic stalls selling local crafts, and food lined the sidewalks, and music seemed to spill from every corner. The highlight was, of course, Clementine's Harmonies. The shop was packed, people spilling out onto the sidewalk. As the afternoon sun began to dip, casting a golden glow over the town, it was my turn to perform on the small outdoor stage we'd set up. My family, Mr. Arthur, Penny, Leo, Mrs. Henderson, Mark Olson, and so many others who had become my anchors, stood in the front row, their faces beaming. I saw the familiar faces of Maple Creek residents, people who had shared their stories, their time, their support. My fingers found the keys of the old upright piano we'd wheeled out from the shop. I took a deep breath and began to play the melody Aunt Clementine had started, the one I had finished. I called it Maple Creek Harmony. As the notes flowed, telling a story of loss, of finding unexpected strength of community, and of a love that transcended absence, a hush fell over the crowd. I sang of old wood and new hope, of quiet courage and voices raised together. When the last note faded, there was a moment of profound silence, then an eruption of applause that felt like a warm embrace. Tears welled in my eyes as I looked out at them. Not tears of sorrow, but of a joy so deep it was almost overwhelming. In that moment, standing on that makeshift stage, surrounded by the love and support of this incredible town, I wasn't the lost, struggling musician from Austin anymore. I was Lila Morgan of Maple Creek, and I belonged. Later, as the festival wound down and fairy lights twinkled across the town green, we gathered inside Clementine's Harmonies. The air was filled with laughter, shared stories, and the lingering scent of apple cider and Penny's famous blueberry pie. Mr. Arthur raised a glass. "To Clementine," he said, his voice thick with emotion, Who knew the true harmony of this town? And to Lila, who helped us all hear it again. Penny hugged me fiercely. You did it, kiddo. You really did it. Leo, ever enthusiastic, was already planning next year's festival. I knew then that Aunt Clementine's true legacy wasn't just the bricks and mortar of the shop or the instruments within. It was this feeling of connection, this vibrant tapestry of lives interwoven, this unwavering support that had lifted me when I'd fallen. It was the strength found not in solitary struggle, but in shared purpose. Long after the last guests had departed, I stood alone in the quiet, newly vibrant space of Clementine's Harmonies. Moonlight streamed through the front window, illuminating the gleaming wood of a guitar, the polished keys of the piano. The shop felt alive, breathing with the stories, the music, and the love that had filled it that day. I ran my fingers gently over the worn cover of Aunt Clementine's journal, now displayed in a place of honor. Aunt Clementine used to say, "Every melody has a story." Now, Clementine's Harmonies not only retold her story, but sang out the melody of Maple Creek itself, a melody of hope, of unity, and of the love of a family. I was lucky enough to find a family forged not by blood, but by shared heartbeats and harmonizing souls. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep within me, these were just the first notes of a beautiful symphony to come. Lila didn't just save a music shop, she reclaimed a legacy. She fought not with anger, but with melody, not with wealth, but with the unwavering harmony of a community that refused to be erased. What started as grief became purpose. What felt like the end of something became the beginning of everything. And in the echo of her aunt's final notes, Lila didn't just find her own song, she found her voice. Because some stories don't need a stage to be heard. Some of the loudest revolutions begin in quiet, wood-paneled rooms filled with memory and music. And sometimes, family isn't who you're born to. It's who stands beside you when your world is about to go silent. Have you ever stood up for something others told you wasn't worth saving? Have you ever risked everything not for recognition, but for meaning? Share your story in the comments. Because your voice, yes, yours, might be the note someone else needs to finally believe in their own. And if this story stirred something quiet but true inside you, follow the channel. We tell stories like Lila's, stories about small towns and second chances, stories about unfinished melodies that find their way home. Not polished, not perfect, but real and deeply human. You belong here, and your next chapter. We'd be honored to share it with you.